This man used a knife to make a small slit in the tape. He then put a straw in the girl's mouth. Because the girl was too thirsty, she had to obediently drink. She drank almost an entire bottle of water. Then he pushed her head back into the bag, zipped the bag and closed the trunk lid. This girl was Lai. She was the item he needed to deliver this time. His full name was Frank Martin and people called him Frank. After being discharged from the army, Frank became a transporter. He would have transported anything as long as he was paid. But it had to follow 3 rules. First, never change the deal. Originally, you said 3 people, but now there are 4 people in the car, so I don't drive. It's no use pointing a gun at my head, Frank said. My car has a password, let me see what you can do. Hearing that, the robber was very angry, but he also had no other choice. He had to shoot one of his accomplices. When the number of people was enough, Frank entered the password. After that, Frank performed a series of skillful moves. There was a line of police cars chasing after them. Frank's superclass driving technique made the robbers so dizzy that they vomited. Not long after, the police chased again. Frank turned his head and saw a container truck. He stepped on the accelerator and drove at full speed. The car rubbed against the bridge, sparking sparks. In just a moment, the car jumped off the bridge. But the number of police cars was too much. Frank took the gun and shot at an iron bar. This caused a car to slide down and hit several police cars. After that, Frank turned 90 degrees to chase the train that was moving. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he escaped the pursuit of the police. Seeing that, the police were extremely angry. He brought the robbers to a safe place. After receiving the transportation fee, Frank changed the license plate and drove away. Although he worked very carefully, the FBI still came to his house. However, because there was no proof, they couldn't do anything. That day, Frank received a special transport. It was a bag 1.5 m long and 50 centimeters wide. The customer was about to tell the recipient information. But his second rule wasn't to mention names. He put the bag on the car and started to leave. Unexpectedly, he hadn't been gone for long when suddenly his tire exploded. This bag seemed heavy. When Frank opened the trunk to get the spare tire, he suddenly saw the bag move. However, his third rule was to never open the package. He took the spare tire to change, then closed the trunk and continued driving. But he still had many doubts. Was there a beautiful girl in the bag? Because Frank had been single for 30 years, he decided to break the rule once. He drove to a remote mountain top. Then he opened the trunk, unzipped the bag. Unexpectedly, there was actually a girl in the bag. He gave her a straw and helped her drink water. Then he pushed her head into the bag and continued on his way. However, along the way, this girl refused to stay still. Frank thought maybe she wanted to say something to him. He drove to the curb again, opened the trunk and released the girl. Now, hurry up if you have something to say. I want to go to the toilet, do you want me to pee in your car, she said. If I had known this, I wouldn't have given you so much water. He then tied a rope around her neck. Give you 1 minute, start the countdown. This girl named Lai quickly ran into the nearby bushes. Time out. Frank pulled on the rope but found something unusual. He rushed over to her. Indeed, she ran away. At this time, Lai was wearing a short skirt and running on the mountainside. Unfortunately, she slipped and fell down the slope. For situations like this, it wasn't difficult for a former soldier like Frank. Soon after, he appeared in front of Lai. He put duct tape on her mouth and took her back to the car. But unexpectedly, Frank just got there and saw 2 FBI agents. Lai tried to call for help. After that, the 2 sides rushed to fight. Frank's speed was very fast. After a few moves he defeated 2 policemen. Arriving at the delivery location, Frank took Lai out and handed her over to the recipient, Darren. Darren said he wanted to transport something. Hearing that, Frank thought this was also a business deal, so he agreed. Frank received the transport fee, picked up the item, and then drove away. At the service station, Frank sat silently and thought about Lai. Suddenly, he remembered that there were 2 FBI agents left in the trunk. After that, he bought 2 cans of soft drink for them to drink. Unexpectedly, Frank had just walked a few steps, the car suddenly exploded. He threw a soda can on the ground and tried to put out the fire on his sleeve. It turned out Darren put a bomb in the car to kill Frank. At this time, Darren's subordinates were playing cards. They suddenly heard the doorbell. One guy got up to look through the door and was kicked over by Frank. Seeing that, the remaining subordinates immediately pulled out their guns to shoot Frank. Frank used the door as a shield. Then he flipped the tablecloth, which made the gun fly up in the air. Frank defeated 2 of Darren's subordinates. He quickly grabbed the gun and pulled the trigger. After that, Frank fired continuously at them. All the subordinates had been defeated. Lai heard gunfire outside. She pushed the chair to the door to hide. In the corridor, there were two guys holding axes who also looked quite dangerous. Although Frank's speed was very fast, it was very difficult for him to beat these two. So he kicked them to faint with his feet. At this moment, there was a guy with a machine gun jumped up to shoot Frank. Seeing that, Frank jumped up and kicked him away. Without finding Darren, Frank couldn't bear to leave either. He drove Darren's car home, and even smashed his gate into pieces. Unexpectedly, when he was just leaving, he suddenly saw Lai in the car. This time Frank didn't hesitate anymore, he directly pulled her out of the car. He ruthlessly pulled Lai away. Frank drove straight ahead, while Lai was screaming in the back. But when looking in the rearview mirror, he stopped the car. Then he backed up the car, put her in the trunk and took her away. When getting home, he took a small knife and cut the rope in her hands. After that, he gave her a bowl of noodles, and he went to his room to sleep. The next day, Lai was in the kitchen early in the morning. She made coffee and also made tea. She even prepared a basket of bread. Frank picked it up and took a bite. Actually, Lai did it because she had a purpose. Last night, she saw Frank's army uniform, even his medals and the photos of him in the past. After knowing Frank's identity, she decided to trust him. After eating the bread, the two of them looked at each other passionately. At this moment, there was a rocket that hit the roof of his house. Frank hugged Lai and hid under the table. They were lucky to escape this time. Outside, machine guns were fired continuously. Eventually, the rocket crashed on Frank's house. Frank pushed Lai into the elevator, pressed the switch. The elevator fell to the basement. Outside, the assailant was still firing rockets at his house. So his whole house exploded. At this time, Frank took Lai and dived into the sea. They swam through a hole, and then went to another house. Frank took off his wet shirt, and revealed his strong and muscular body. Seeing that, Lai approached him, and wanted to repay him. After that, the two of them had fun together. Not long after, Lai revealed her true purpose. It turned out the people chasing them were traffickers. And they were preparing to transport 400 Chinese people to the G port. Her father and younger sister were also in it. At this point, Frank realized he was being taken advantage of. However, he also couldn't do anything else. After that, Frank and Lai broke into Darren's office and controlled him. When they were looking for the list, Darren said Lai's father was coming. Hearing that, Frank was bewildered. Didn't you say your father was on the boat? It turned out that Lai's father was a tycoon in the human trafficking world. At this point, he rushed in and pointed a gun at Frank's head. Lai didn't have time to do anything, and was overpowered by Darren. At this time, the FBI inspector also arrived. Darren knocked Frank out, then handed him over to the inspector, Tarkoni. After regaining consciousness, Frank told the whole incident to Tarkoni. Tarkoni thought if he gave this case to Frank, the success rate of this case would be higher. So he cooperated with Frank and helped him get out of the police department safely. Tarkoni gave his gun to Frank. But unexpectedly, Frank had a lot of weapons. You probably don't need it, do you? The inspector said. Frank went to the G port, took out a sound detector to search each container. And Frank coincidentally overheard Darren exchanging delivery locations with the driver. Meanwhile, Lai was being forced to leave by her father. Frank jumped on top of the container to chase them. He jumped up and clung to the side of the container. A driver looked in the rearview mirror and saw Frank. So he intentionally crashed into the roadside signs to make Frank fall. Seeing this, Frank hurriedly jumped on a public bus. When the bus arrived at the stop, he immediately jumped off. As a result, he was stopped by several people. He turned around and knocked one guy out. After that, Frank took off his shirt and wrapped it around the second guy's neck. But the third was very strong and even taller than Frank. He grabbed Frank by the neck and kicked him repeatedly in the stomach. Frank was forced to use dangerous moves. At this time, another group of people came. Frank kicked and spilled 2 barrels of oil. He then used all his strength to push the tall guy down. And he rolled and the oil barrel spilled all over him. So Frank's whole body was slippery, and no one could do anything to him. Frank jumped on a bicycle, broke 2 pedals and put his feet in. Then he rushed forward and confidently kicked the big guy to the ground. He continued to kick many times, which caused the other group to be knocked down. But another group of people kept coming. Frank quickly ran away. At this time, he used the big guy as a shield to jump into the water. Frank then climbed ashore and drove a car after them. However, after that, the car's engine suddenly broke down and couldn't move. At this moment, there was a plane flying over his head. But the owner of this plane wasn't enthusiastic and friendly. Hurry up, don't hesitate, Frank threatened with a gun. Seeing that, the man had to obey Frank. Thanks to that, Frank quickly caught up with the target. He landed on top of the container. The driver was scared to turn around to check, but then he was kicked away. Darren also quickly chased and climbed into the container truck. He grabbed Frank by the neck and even used his legs to break Frank's neck. Then, Darren quickly pulled the brake and caused Frank to fall out. Darren thought he had solved Frank, but no. Frank clung to the bottom of the truck, but was discovered by La's father. He took a gun and shot at Frank. But Frank quickly threw the iron hook, and knocked his driver unconscious. He then climbed onto the top of the truck and jumped up. He tried to hold on tight, and kicked hard into the car compartment. He grabbed Darren by the neck and kicked him out. At this time, Frank drove to the beach and breathed a sigh of relief. But unexpectedly, there was a gun barrel pointed at his head. It turned out to be La's father. He was extremely angry. He said, "If you want to be my son-in-law, wait for the next life." Then a gunshot rang out. Frank looked down at himself and found he wasn't shot. However, the person who was shot was La's father. And La shot him. She said over the years her father did too many bad things, and even killed her mother. Inspector Tarconi and the police had finally arrived. People locked in containers were also saved. Frank and La began a happy life together.